In 1967, roughly 10 pirate radio ships off the English coast were reaching 15 million listeners a day, playing rock and pop that the BBC flatly refused to air. They forced Britain's national broadcaster to create a new station, just to keep up, and they invented the format that commercial radio still runs on today. That was nearly 60 years ago. By 2025, the FCC was issuing individual fines north of $2 million against pirate operators in Miami, and Ofcom was running 60 enforcement operations a year across the United Kingdom. Pirate radio never faded, it just changed shape entirely. Before the pirate ships and the encrypted digital transmitters, European radio was a government-controlled monopoly, with almost no room for dissent. In the United Kingdom in the early 1960s, the BBC held absolute authority over the domestic airwaves, and its programming leaned heavily toward classical music, educational broadcasts, and carefully sanitized entertainment that the post-war youth population found completely irrelevant to their lives. The demand for rock and roll was enormous, but the legal radio ecosystem offered nothing to satisfy it. So in 1964, a station called Radio Caroline began broadcasting from a converted ship called the MV Me Amigo, anchored in the North Sea just outside British territorial waters, deliberately placed beyond the reach of domestic broadcasting law. Free from the strict limits on recorded music that hobbled the BBC, Radio Caroline and its rival offshore stations broadcast popular music around the clock, introducing a casual, high-energy style of presentation that made the formal BBC announcers sound like they belonged to a previous century entirely. DJs like John Peel, Tony Blackburn, and Kenny Everett became household names almost overnight, and in the process they essentially invented the modern radio personality from scratch. The British government responded with a two-pronged strategy that would define how authorities dealt with pirate radio for the next 6 decades. Parliament passed the Marine Broadcasting Offences Act of 1967, criminalizing any mainland support for offshore stations, and then the BBC launched Radio 1 that very same year, hiring many of the pirate DJs it had just outlawed, which, looking back, was either a stroke of bureaucratic brilliance or an extraordinary admission that the pirates had been right all along. And this wasn't strictly a European phenomenon. During the Vietnam War, a clandestine station called Radio First Termer broadcast acid rock and raw anti-war satire from a location in Saigon for 21 days in January 1971, using unauthorized military equipment to reach combat-weary American troops on frequencies that official armed forces radio would never touch. Wherever the official airwaves refused to carry what people actually wanted to hear, someone found a way to broadcast it anyway. But this wasn't just about one country's broadcasting monopoly anymore, and the consequences of suppressing the offshore pirates reached far beyond anything the British government anticipated. The closure of the pirate ships pushed unauthorized broadcasting into an entirely different form, one that would reshape global music culture from the ground up over the following 3 decades. By the 1980s and the 1990s, pirate radio had migrated from the open sea to the rooftops of London's residential tower blocks, where operators on shoestring budgets broadcast the genres that mainstream stations completely ignored. Early electronic dance music, hip-hop, reggae, and the raw beginnings of uniquely British sonic movements all found their first audiences through illegal FM transmitters bolted to council housing rooftops. These stations functioned as the central nervous system for rapidly evolving local subcultures, giving DJs and MCs the ability to test unreleased tracks pressed onto limited-run dub plates directly with their communities in real time. bypassing every traditional gatekeeper in the music industry. The trajectory of London-based Rinse FM tells you everything about what pirate radio actually built during those decades. Founded in 1994 in East London, Rinse FM operated illegally for over 15 years from contested rooftops, and in that time it became the single most important launching platform for grime music, giving first exposure to artists like Dizzy Rascal and Wiley long before the mainstream industry was paying any attention at all. The personal cost of running these operations was immense. In 2005, co-founder Slim Z received what is widely believed to be the first anti-social behavior order ever issued against a pirate radio operator, banning him from accessing any rooftop in the borough of Tower Hamlets above 4 stories for a period of 5 years, along with criminal charges and a 3-year conditional discharge for property damage. But here's the part that most accounts of this era leave out entirely. Rinse FM's cultural gravity eventually grew so undeniable that Ofcom awarded the station an official community broadcasting license in 2010, and it went fully legal in February 2011, completing a transformation from criminal enterprise to recognized cultural institution within a single generation. The story could have ended there, with pirate radio slowly absorbed into the legal mainstream and fading into a nostalgic footnote about music history. Instead, the technology shifted underneath everything. Modern pirate operators solved the single vulnerability that had haunted terrestrial broadcasters for decades by physically separating the studio from the transmitter. Using what the industry calls studio-to-transmitter links, contemporary pirates locate their production studios miles away from the actual antenna and send encrypted audio through microwave relays or secure internet connections to a remote transmission site. When regulators triangulate the broadcast signal and raid the location, all they find is a cheap, easily replaceable FM exciter sitting on a rooftop. The studio, the talent, and the organizational infrastructure remain completely untouched, and the financial loss of a confiscated transmitter is absorbed as a basic, expected operating expense. The far bigger shift, though, has been the wholesale migration to the internet. Streaming platforms built on open-source protocols like Icecast and Shoutcast now allow anyone with a laptop and a home studio to broadcast live audio to thousands of concurrent listeners worldwide, completely eliminating the need to climb a tower block or risk arrest over an antenna installation. The legal battlefield has migrated with it, moving away from spectrum management agencies and toward copyright enforcement bodies, chasing unlicensed music across decentralized global servers. And running parallel to this digital expansion is a revival that nobody predicted. In 2025 and 2026, international hobbyist networks have been organizing shortwave pirate broadcasts on frequencies like 3,975 kilohertz and 6,160 kilohertz, deliberately bouncing signals off the ionosphere to achieve intercontinental reach in tribute to the offshore ships of the 1960s. Meanwhile, a generation raised entirely on algorithmic playlists from Spotify and Apple Music has started building independent pop-up digital radio stations, seeking the kind of authentic human curation that no streaming algorithm can replicate. And their underlying motivation echoes the exact same frustration that put Radio Caroline on the water 6 decades ago. Governments have not been standing idle while all of this has evolved, and the enforcement data from 2025 and 2026 reflects the most aggressive global crackdown in the history of unauthorized broadcasting. In the United States, the Pirate Act of 2020 gave the FCC 2 instruments it had never possessed before: the The first was the authority to impose fines exceeding $2 million against a single pirate operation, with mandatory inflation adjustments pushing the ceiling past $2.4 million by 2025. The second, and arguably more devastating, was the power to issue massive fines directly against property owners and building managers who allow illegal transmitters on their premises, effectively outsourcing the first layer of enforcement to landlords who now face catastrophic personal liability for failing to police their own rooftops. During fiscal year 2025, the FCC issued 10 formal liability notices, sent 28 property owner warnings, and assessed total penalties exceeding $5 million across all active cases. The landmark case was Fabrice Polynice, who operated a Haitian community station called Radio Touche Douce on 90.1 FM in North Miami for over a decade under the name DJ Paz. Despite repeated raids and equipment seizures by U.S. Marshals, Polynice kept broadcasting, and the FCC ultimately issued a forfeiture order of nearly $2.4 million against him personally. When he argued that he simply could not pay, the commission rejected the defense, stating that the severity and willfulness of the violations justified the maximum penalty regardless of his financial circumstances. If you are wondering how a community radio station operator is supposed to come up with that kind of money, so is everyone else. Across the Atlantic, Ofcom conducted 60 disruption operations during the fiscal year from 2024 to 2025, a figure that has held remarkably steady near 50 to 60 per year for 3 consecutive years. And that consistency itself is a warning sign that regulators have been unable to permanently eliminate. In Vietnam, the government deployed an artificial intelligence-powered monitoring platform called iSpectra in September 2025, converting thousands of commercial cell towers into a nationwide RF sensor grid capable of detecting unauthorized transmissions in near real time. With over 500 violating devices flagged since 2023. And in Kenya, the Communications Authority revoked 56 broadcasting licenses and identified 17 fully unauthorized stations in a single quarter, with overall sector compliance dropping to just 46%. The pattern across all of this data points in a single, sobering direction. Every time a government successfully crushes one form of pirate radio, the underlying demand that created it migrates to a new technology, a new platform, a new generation of operators willing to absorb the risk. The offshore ships became tower block transmitters. The tower blocks became encrypted digital streams. And the digital streams are now splintering into pop-up microstations that appear and vanish faster than any enforcement body can meaningfully respond to them. The real question is not whether pirate radio can survive, because it already has survived everything that 6 decades of international legislation, multi-million-dollar fines, criminal prosecution, and artificial intelligence-driven surveillance have thrown at it. The question is what its stubborn, unbroken persistence says about the legal media ecosystem it exists beside, and whether the industries that spent half a century fighting unauthorized broadcasters will ever honestly confront the market failures that keep producing new pirates every single year.